Are we working? All right. Hello, world. Yeah, I've not been particularly well, which is why I've not been putting any videos up, and I'm still not particularly well, as you can probably hear. Um, but I have got the Beatles in mono box set here, which I will pick up and show you. Okay, there's the box. It's rather heavy. Okay, I'm not going to bleat on too much about what you get in the box because there are literally loads of videos up about it. But I'm just going to give you a quick review of what I think of it, really. Okay, first of all, my copy is not entirely blemish free. I went to somewhere on Amazon and found a cheapy box that described itself as used. The albums were unopened, but there was a rip on the cover. You get like a slip cover like that, which I can't imagine anyone who's actually using these things would actually want to keep on there anyway. I've still got my slip cover. I haven't thrown it away. But basically, what actually comes in this box are all of the Beatles LPs that were released in mono and an album called Mono Masters, which collects up the singles and a few other tracks that also had mono mixes. So essentially, the albums that had mono mixes were all of them basically from Please Please Me up until the White Album in 1968. Abbey Road and Let It Be were only ever released in stereo, so they don't come in here. Okay, but the singles that were released around about that time actually do. I believe the only Beatles single, and this is only an I believe, no, there might have been two, the Ballad of John and Yoko and Let It Be, I think were essentially the only ones that had stereo only mixes as singles as well. So there isn't a mono mix of Let It Be unless it's bootleg somewhere. So yeah, now I've also got in my collection, I've got a bit of a mishmash of Beatles stuff, and there's another video somewhere on YouTube of essentially what's in my Beatles collection. But I've got a mishmash of very old first and second mono pressings, 80s and 70s stereo pressings of albums, but never really the complete set of each. I've also got a whole ton of CDs, some of them 80s CDs, some of them 2009 remasters, mainly the 80s ones, it has to be said. And I don't want to diss any of them really. The only thing that I will say really in this lot's favour is that it really is the only way to listen to the Beatles in mono. Okay. Did that come out right? The only way to listen to the Beatles is in mono. Okay. And it's not on CD either. Okay. It just doesn't sound right on CD. Even though it sounds very good. Putting this lot on is like the closest that you'll ever come to sort of, or most of us will ever come to sort of physical contact with the Beatles. That might sound weird to say, okay, but because you get a book in this as well, and as they say about 100 times in the book, the Beatles spent far more time on their mono mixes than the stereo ones, where they'll say, oh, it took maybe, I don't know, 13 hours to mix a selection of tracks into mono. It might have only taken 4 hours or something to mix it into stereo. Some of them were mixed in about half an hour. There's one where about 5 tracks were mixed for stereo in about half an hour flat. So they were prioritising the mono mixes in the 60s, basically because in the UK, that's what most people had to play their records on, especially most pop fans. Okay, and also in this book, it kind of also confirms this. This, I suppose, it is a myth that digital files will tell you that records are compromised because when they master them, they don't want the stylus to jump out of the groove. Well, that is only, it's not an inherent limitation of vinyl. It's an inherent limitation in terms of the markets that they were selling to. Okay, in the Beatles' time, people who bought pop records were largely considered to be young teenagers who had the cheapest record players ever imaginable, and cheap record players in the 60s really were cheap and nasty in the same way that they really are cheap and nasty now. At EMI, they had quality control people that would take a new cutting that hasn't been sort of stamped into records yet. They would take the cutting, they would play it on the very, very cheapest, crappiest little thing that they could ever put out. And if it jumped, it didn't get approved for cutting. You'd have to go back and do it again. Okay? And there were very strict instructions and specifications about that cutting. For this box set here, they have largely ignored those restrictions because record players today tend to be better. The kind of person that's going to buy this Beatles box set, I really hope, is going to spend more on their record player than they are on this box set. Okay? The Riga RP1, which I believe is the minimum that people should spend. I don't necessarily say get the RP1. You don't have to, obviously. I'm not a dictator. At least I don't think I am. But something around the cheaper projects and stuff like that, also pretty good. And we'll also make a decent fist of playing these, but please spend more than the box set on a record player to play them. It's really not a huge amount to ask. Okay, I'm apologising for my voice now because it's it's really poor at the moment. Right, so putting these on then is not this experience of it's exactly what the Beatles fans heard in the 60s. As much as the hype and the myths would like to tell you it isn't. It's actually one hell of a lot better. Okay, there are reasons for that. Most vinyl playing systems and music playing systems these days are transistorized, whereas in those days there would be valve and tubes, as Americans would call them. They sound quite different. So unless you've got equipment, from the 60s, some lovely quad amplifiers and that sort of thing, to play these things on, then it's not going to sound like that. It's really not going to sound like that. But I'm happy to say the experience is one heck of a lot better. They really are extremely good pressings and cuttings. And for anyone that wants to buy, either to replace their knackered old 60s or 70s pressings of these albums, or, well, hopefully not bin them, keep the old ones, but use these. Use these, okay? The monos are available on the CD, but on CD, they made digital files of them. And that's true for monos and the stereos on CD. They made digital files of them. On the stereo LPs, they also made digital files of them, but the advantage of that in terms of the stereo thing is that when they put them onto CD, they had to downsample them from 24-bit to 16-bit, whereas when they cut them onto record, you're actually hearing 24-bit, an analog representation of 24-bit, which is marginally better than 16-bit. But these are the analog tapes. These are the analog tapes. They're inside each record. You get a little card which tells you that it's been cut from the analog tapes. Inside Please Please Me, there's a little card, and it tells you that because the mono Please Please Me master tapes were slightly damaged, playing it in one continuous hit would mean that you'd get like sticky gunk from where all the edits and things were put together, which would land on the tape head, so that by the time you got to the end of one side, the quality would have diminished. So they had to very carefully make a new analog master tape to cut the album from, because you can't cut an album a song at a time. You have to do it all in one continuous go. It sounds pretty painstaking, but they are fantastic. Use them as your main. Every time you want to play a Beatles record, grab one of these, okay? And like I say, mono is the way to go in terms of, you know, what the Beatles intended people to hear, and in terms of the sheer power and guts of the sound, and this kind of physical closeness to the Beatles. Go for these. They're analog cuttings. They haven't been put anywhere near anything digital. It's lovely. Okay. The only sort of concession to modernity that I believe they used is that they didn't use a 60s reel-to-reel tape machine to make the cuttings from. They used an 80s Studer, I think, a Studer A80, I believe, and they used an 80s cutting machine. So they had to kind of translate what the notes were for the instructions to make the cuttings from the old equipment, and try and sort of replicate that a little bit. They've done it fantastically, and you know, it has to be said, they sound better than the stereos. The stereos don't have quite that grip to them, whereas this is brilliant. Okay, just before I go, here's With the Beatles. I have this in mono, and where it won't be long, sounds like someone is frying bacon and eggs in the same room as them playing, because those cymbals are so sizzly and crackly. It sounds fantastic on here, really crisp. Yes, it's a little bit bright because that's obviously how it was originally intended to be, but it's nowhere near that kind of sort of confused and muddly, sort of sizzly bacon and eggs style cymbals. Okay, and you know, you could take it the whole way along, really. On Please Please Me, it's lovely. I've heard it before, and I've probably even got it somewhere on CD, but it's lovely to hear the proper mono Please Please Me, because the stereo take was a different take. They cocked up the lyrics at the end in the backing vocals, and also they made a complete lash up of the harmonica overdub at the end, and it's actually out of sync on the stereo version, which is why it suddenly goes more reverberant and more echoey towards the end, because they couldn't get that in perfect sync, and it's a bit of a mess towards the end. Whereas it's lovely, it's clean, it's powerful, it's all together, and it's a correct performance on the mono album. It's lovely. It's lovely. There's no fake stereo Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You on here either, which there is on the stereo album, because that was the closest they could get, because they used to destroy the multi-track tapes after they'd been released in those days, after the master had been made. So they obviously kept a master of Love Me Do, but it was mono. And so they had to do a fake stereo for it for the stereo release, and it's lovely and powerful and gutsy here in mono. Okay, fake stereo, it has to be said, doesn't always sound very good. Let's put that in the right place. What else have we got in here that I can mention? I've never heard a stereo for sale, never had one. So this is the second mono copy of this I've got. The other mono copy I've got is a 1987 reissue that was done from the CD, or the same files, as it were, same digital masters that they made when they first released the Beatles on CD in the 80s. Anything else I can say here? Help, again, sounds delicious. Again, the mono copy that I've got is in really bad nick, and it's 100 times better here. Okay, probably because it's a brand new album as well. While I'm here, these flip black sleeves, while they look okay on a knackered LP cover, they look a bit weird here, but that's how they were. You don't get, although in the olden days they did have these flip back sleeves on the stereo versions as well as the monos. When you buy the new supposedly replicas, you don't get flip backs there. I don't know what you call them, but the tabs are on the inside. Rubber sole, absolutely amazing. Okay, there is a cough on the mono version of Norwegian Wood, which I can hear on my old second pressing rubber sole if I want to. Is actually in full glory here. It's weird. It's very weird. All right. What else can we say? Again, my old mono copy of Rubber Soul, Revolver, is completely knackered. Okay, I've got three, I suppose, completely knackered mono pressings. Okay, I don't know whether my Revolver's first or second pressing. All I know is that I found it incredibly cheap somewhere, and it really had taken an absolute pounding. Okay, still played. I noticed the last time I played it, which was ages ago, I noticed that the bass on Here, There and Everywhere was wildly uncontrolled, and Yellow Submarine was extremely badly compressed. That seems to have been because they obviously didn't heed all those instructions about making sure it played on the very cheapest record player. It's been remedied here. Sergeant Pepper, got an original mono of that as well, and that plays brilliantly, plays absolutely brilliantly, but I'll probably play this one and keep my original in in good condition or in the condition that it's in, and probably play this one. There was nothing wrong inherently with most of the mono pressings of these albums. It's just that they're so knackered now that new ones seem to be the order of the day, and now they're very easy to get as well, although you can only get them in I think you might be able to buy them individually, but they're not widely available. In HMV you can walk in and buy any of the stereos individually, but you can't get them on the high street with these monos. Okay, this is Magical Mystery Tour. This one I'm really disappointed in. I should really tell the seller, because this booklet, I'm not going to do it because it'll tear, but there's a tear in a couple of the staples here, which means that the booklet is falling out. But the album is fantastic. This one's a bit weird. It's not on Parlophone because it was never released originally on Parlophone. Its first British release was 1976. What I would absolutely love is for someone to put a recutting of the original EP in mono and stereo out on the market, because that's what we got in England, the EP. The LP, the American LP, had these extra tracks on here, which was a good idea at the time because Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane hadn't been put onto an album. Neither had All You Need Is Love. So you've got a collection of singles here that hadn't been put on an album, but because they hadn't been put on an album, students of the Beatles, what do you know? They won't have had stereo masters at the time, or stereo remixes, okay? I think Strawberry Fields got one because it was originally intended for Sgt. Pepper. But Penny Lane didn't. Neither did Hello Goodbye. So these were originally, for the stereo edition anyway, they were fake stereos. All You Need Is Love was a fake stereo, okay? And they got stereo mixes. Most the ones that are in Yellow Submarine, which was a year later, they got stereo mixes then, but a couple of them had to wait until 1971 before they got stereo mixes. So this is the only genuine way to hear the songs on this album, okay, in mono, or at least the songs on side 2 of this album, okay. It's a bit complicated round about this time, particularly the American market was just really weird, what was available. And I'm going all dark and underexposed. Is that better? Yes, ish. Now you can see my face. Right. So yeah, this comes on the Capitol label as well. And what does it say on this little card that comes on the inside here? As you can see, also this card's all bent over as well. And I did unwrap it from the cellophane, so yeah, I don't understand quite why it's in relatively bad condition. Okay, so it says here, because Magical Mystery Tour was not released as a British LP in 1967, it was necessary to create a new master using the original mono tapes for the EP release and the singles included on the second side of the album. To avoid the risk of damaging the masters by removing tracks from their original reels and then returning them, the original tapes were copied to a new cutting master created for this release. So there you go, they had to make a new analog master for that. Hopefully, well, I know, because it sounds absolutely amazing, I know that that analog master, and the same for Please Please Me as well, I know that analog master will be fabulous, and hopefully they'll be able to make sort of further re-releases of these albums using the analog tapes. Okay, so here's the white album. I haven't played this one yet. I do know the mono mix. I've heard it. I think somewhere on my iTunes library I've got a transfer that I made with my P5 of it as well. This one is the only one where I would say out of the whole lot of them, if you've got an analog stereo version, play the analog stereo version. In fact, I've got a new 2009 stereo version as well, which also sounds very good. The stereo version is better with this one. Okay, by 1968, stereo record players were becoming much cheaper. So yes, they still had the same ceramic-y style sapphire needles on them, and so yeah, they would still be subject to limitations and quality control in brackets to make sure that those sapphire needles could play without jumping, but in terms of the actual music that's on here, the mono does feel in places slightly limited. I really don't understand why a minute's worth of Helter Skelter was cut off from the mono version. Perhaps, maybe, the mono edition was the one that they intended, just, you know, a short burst of something extremely loud, and somebody accidentally pressed the stereo version of Helter Skelter and let it go on too long. I don't know, but it certainly it sounds better in stereo. Okay, now some of you might be wondering where Yellow Submarine is. Yellow Submarine was released in mono, but most of the songs that were on Yellow Submarine were not given a separate mono mix. Instead, they did what the Americans have been doing throughout the whole time of the Beatles releases, and that is in most cases where they wanted to release a mono version, rather than using the specific mono mix, they quite often took the stereos and blended those into one channel and made a cutting of that. So, for example, where the song Yellow Submarine on Revolver in mono has the correct first guitar chord underneath In the Town, which is missing from the stereo version, and where it has the correct backing vocals in the As We Live a Life of Ease bit on the mono version, that's correct. On the stereo version of Revolver, those bits were missed out. However, it's the stereo version of Yellow Submarine that is used for the stereo version of the LP Yellow Submarine. The mono version takes that stereo mix without that extra guitar chord and backing vocals and the slightly different effects that are on here, and makes a mono blend of that. Okay, so it's not really a true mono. Okay, it's a stereo that's been blended into mono. As such, it's not included here. Okay, but what you do get, let's put Revolver back. What you do get is this album here. Where's it gone? I haven't played all of this yet. I've played some of it. There were a few separate proper mono mixes made of the songs on Yellow Submarine. There's a mono of Only a Northern Song, All Together Now, Hey Bulldog, and It's All Too Much. Okay, which were pretty much the new tracks that appeared on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, but they were never released. But here they have been. Okay, so you do get a little bit of a concession to Yellow Submarine there, but most of the other tracks, in terms of the Beatles tracks anyway, are available elsewhere in the same box set. Okay, because they were just basically, they rehashed old songs essentially. Okay, if that makes any sense at all. I really didn't intend to drone on for half an hour. Get this mono box set, use it as your main Beatles collection along with the stereo Abbey Road and Let It Be. Okay, because it really is quite simply marvellous. Okay, it will not take you and let you hear the Beatles as the fans first heard them. That's just hyperbole and crap basically. Okay, but it will, you'll hear the Beatles sounding absolutely fabulous and amazing nonetheless, and probably far more amazing than they've ever sounded. Okay, this is a complete revelation, a complete revelation. Okay, all right, see you later.